This is Miss Tora coming to you again with another academic guidance lesson on the gradebook. Enjoy. In class, these are the things that we covered as in our discussion, and then the kids had a closing task of writing down 3 things they learned, 2 things they found interesting, and 1 thing they still had a question on. So first we talk about what's the job of being a student. Because they get up every morning, they come to school, they have a certain outfit they got to wear. So what do they get paid to do? The kids talk about this for a little bit, and they always come up with learning, right? Their job is to learn. Then we talk about how if money were tied to grades and they got paid for what they learned, would they try a little harder and would they pay attention a little closer to their grades? And it's a unanimous yes. So then we talk about how it is a reality that you do get paid for your grades, and it's called KEYS money, and it starts in high school, and how they base your KEYS money scholarship based on your GPA for the semesters. Talk about how do you figure your GPA. So we talk about how each letter is assigned points and that their report card kind of can be, tallied to figure out how much points they score on any given report card. And then we talk about how you divide that by the total number possible. And then we practice. So I get the kids to write down that a C is worth 2 points, a D is worth 1 point, and we go all the way down and we assign the number values for the letters. And then we talk about how you divide it by the number possible, which would be all A's, which 6 times 4 is 24. So they do a little math problem and they figure out that this person's GPA is a 2.0. And then we look at again how much you would get paid if in fact you scored a 2.0. And we come to the conclusion that you wouldn't get paid anything because the smallest amount you do get paid for is a 2.5. Talk about kind of the importance of understanding grades, and then what does it require you to do in terms of what should you pay attention to. So we talk about the SPP&G policies that's set up by JCPS, and how one of the requirements is that teachers have 6 different categories, and the teachers can pick the categories, and these are some examples. And then we talk about some of the other policy requirements that you have to have at least 2 grades in each category by the end of the 6 weeks, which would be 12 grade minimum. And then we have that the categories equal 100%, that's required. And then our SPDM policy states that instructional tasks and assessments, they got to be graded and communicated to the kiddos and put up in IC within 1 week. And we talk about how that's important because if they turn in an assignment or they do a project, they need to know how they do, because see, that's how we get better. You get feedback, go, okay, I did well, I didn't do too well on this is how I improve. And so getting that within a timeline of a week is helpful. Then we talk about the grading scale and how that's affected and what the ranges are, but we mainly talk about the fact that it's based on standards and how JCPS is going to more of a standards-based grading, which means that when the kid gets a paper back, right, it's going to be ranking them on where they are in terms of that standard. So, for example, if the standard says I can compare and contrast a text, okay, that's the standard they're supposed to know. So if they get an A on that piece of assignment, then they're above the standard. They're doing more than whatever their grade level standard requires. B is they're meeting it, so they're right on par. C is that they're approaching, so they haven't mastered it all the time just yet, but they're getting closer. D is below, and a U is substantially below. We talk about what the word substantial means, how it's a lot, and how if they get a U on a standard, then they're not at the grade level in which they need to be at. They're substantially below it, and what that means. So then we talk about the importance of checking grades on Infinite Campus and how it's important to be an advocate for themselves and understand and monitor how they're doing. So then I show them how to read their grades, and we talk about the category and how much it weighs, what the name of the assignment means, and what standard it's connected to, the points possible, and then we talk about the point totals at the end so they can get a feel for what it actually looks like. And then we talk about the pie. So I give them a visual of what the 100% looks like. And we talk about how teachers have the choice of however to weigh their pie, weigh the pieces. So here we talk about how tests and projects for this teacher weigh the most, 50% of the grade, and how participation might not weigh that much. So then we talk about what does that relate in terms of the importance of the assignments that they do in class and how they rank. Then we look at another screenshot of a grade book, and we talk about how the weight of the categories work. And then we talk about how that kid in this slide isn't getting all their in-class points. They're getting 7 out of 10, which is a D minus. And that weighs 20%. So this kid is below the standard of whatever the grade level it is in terms of doing what their in-class work is. And then they're struggling with homework. So we talk about what that means and how if they average the class totals, this person would be failing and substantially below what their grade level requires. Try and give them a picture analogy. So like if you have a Bugatti and 30% of it's gone, can you drive it? Or if you had a house and 30% of your house wasn't accessible, how would that be? And we look at, what if 30% of your outfit was gone? Or what if 30% of your phone was cut off? And how those things add up, and it really does make a difference in terms of how your grade is calculated. And then we discuss another example here, and we talk about the weight of how like this test category is 25%, and projects is 25%, so that's half their grade. And then we talk about how impactful it is if you are missing an assignment. So like this kid's missing a reading log, and it's considered a project, so their average down the bottom is 20%, and how it's important for that kid to get it in. And then we talk a little bit about what 50% means and what it looks like, and kind of, how it is a substantial amount. And then we review this slide. It's pretty interesting. I ask the kids what they think the word dropped means. And I haven't come across a class yet that got it, or a kid who got it. They think mainly what dropped means is that the teacher lost it or the grade went down. And so we talk about how if they drop the grade, the teacher's doing that for the benefit of the student, and how they're pretending, so to speak, that didn't happen in order to help the average of the grade. And we talk about the numbers on the screen. And then we talk about the strengths and some good things about turning in work late. And then we talk about things that, kind of stink about turning in work late, and how being knowledgeable of what your teacher takes off if it is late, if they take off anything, like all of these things matter. So we talk about that and kind of figure out what the pros and cons are of this and being knowledgeable. And this is actually a big slide too for all grades really, because a lot of our kids, when they're sick or they're absent, like their accountability to follow up with whatever they missed is non-existent. So we talk about the importance of what it's like to be absent and what happens if a teacher's absent, and a bus driver or if somebody in the NBA. So we make those analogies and talk about the responsibility it takes to follow up with. If you are out, it's okay, but you got to be responsible and get your material in. We'll talk about this line in terms of like the missing that the teachers write in the comments, because that should be a trigger and like an aha for the kiddo, like, oh man, I'm missing that, I need to get it. And check in with their teacher, because a lot of teachers have the work in the back of the room, or they'll give it to them on a certain day, or it's online. So we talk about how, like, look man, if that's missing, you got to pay attention to it and get it in. And then we talk about this one in terms of like how much it weighs, the fact that it's 50% of this person's grade and they're not getting all their points in their writing, and how like the kids should be paying attention to what the rubric is and how it's graded. But then also considering the assignments, down below for the projects. I mean, this kid isn't doing their reading log well, and that's a big part of their grade, and they're missing some research. So we talk about how, like at this point, if you're not logging in, you're not paying attention, this is money in a couple of years when you're in high school, because, then you get paid. And so to pay attention to this, because, it matters. And on this slide, I tell a little story about how when I was in college, how I kept my papers, and one time I got my report card, so to speak, and the grade wasn't as expected. It was lower than what I thought it was going to be, and how I had to meet with a professor, and the professor accidentally transposed some numbers. So like I got an 86, but he put a 68 in the grade book. And so it made the difference in my report card. And so we talk about how, like he didn't do it on purpose, but like if I were getting paid in terms of that grade, a C is a 2.0, I'd be getting nothing. But if I got a 3.0, which is a B, it's $250. And so how it's important to really pay attention and advocate for yourself and ask questions and be knowledgeable of where you are and where you stand in the class. And then to wrap up, we talk about the importance of knowing their grades and checking in and logging into Portal. And I give them some tips if they have trouble. The email address in red is our STC coordinator, and she's really good about emailing the kid back and going, here, I'm going to help you out. So I encourage them to email her. And then we talk about the Infinite Campus app. It's free, and you can get it on any smartphone and set it up with your grades. And all you need is the district code, which is that WHBFL code right there. And that the app, they can have access to it 24/7. And you can even set it up on the settings, like if the teacher logs in like a missing assignment, it dings the phone. It sends an alert to the phone. So it's a really quick and easy, convenient way to stay, informed about how you're doing in class. And parents, you can get this too. The app works also for your phones and your accounts. So, again, if you have any questions, email Miss Denton, and she's in charge of coordinating all that. So then we wrap up with the kiddos, and we go over the objective and if we met it, and then they share what they wrote down on their paper, their ahas and anything they found interesting, and then we go over any questions they had. And the kids usually give me feedback on what they thought or ways to improve. So it's a really good lesson. And the whole point is we want our kids to be responsible and own their grades, and do so with all the different technologies and availabilities that they have out there, and just be knowledgeable and speak up and ask questions. Thank you.